Welcome everyone, Catherine Korostoff here from Research Rockstar. And today I'm very happy to say that we have a special guest with us, Maya Middlemiss, who is an expert on a topic that I know is of great concern to many of our listeners. I talked to a lot of our students in the Research Rockstar community about changes in their work life over the last year or so. And for many of our students, what has happened is some of you have perhaps worked from home part-time, and then you went to full-time work from home, or for some of you, work from home this past year was entirely new. But the real question that I'm hearing from our students is about situations where now you're trying to say whether or not you're going to continue working from home. Maybe you work at a company that's giving you that option. They're giving you an option either to do a hybrid scenario or fully work from home. And you've got a lot of questions and concerns about that. And that's why I wanted to have the conversation with Maya, because Maya is an expert on managing remote teams in general, but has also obviously with her work in remote teams gotten a lot into helping to optimize the process of work from home. And what's interesting about Maya's work is she does this from two angles. She looks at it both from the leadership management angle, but also for the individual who's trying to manage a career when they may in fact be remote. So welcome, Maya. It's wonderful to have you with us today.
Oh, it's a great pleasure. Thanks so much for inviting me and for exploring this really important topic.
Now, I have to ask, how did you start getting involved in looking at work from home research? Was this just naturally from your work in looking at remote work in general?
Yes, it was. I have been working from home and growing to manage a remote team since the turn of the millennium, which I can date very easily by the growth of my millennium baby, who is now towering over me, 21-year-old. So obviously it's the whole idea of what working from home means has changed very dramatically through that time. The social landscape and most of all the technological landscape has transformed radically. For me, it's been an important part of my life now. I couldn't ever imagine going back to work in somebody else's office. As of about 4 years ago now, I transitioned out of research fieldwork into full-time freelance writing and consulting, and inevitably a lot of my beat led me to working with remote teams and what used to be a managed process of teams transitioning to a more office optional way of life. So used to work with teams in terms of designing a process, piloting it and evaluating it, usually with small numbers of people and often on a voluntary basis. This was something people wanted. Obviously, all of that changed 15 months ago or whenever it was. Time's a little bit weird right now, when suddenly everybody was working from home. And at that time, I was working on the book about how to work from home, because obviously I thought that I had nothing else to learn after 20 years. I had it all specced out. And then suddenly the balloon went up and we had this new demographic now of reluctant and ill-prepared home workers who were suddenly thrust into this way of working, often with equally ill-prepared managers and supervisors who had no idea, often very senior people who'd never had to manage people who were distributed all over the country or maybe all over the world. And now we're coming to this point, hopefully, where things are starting to return to something. Nobody's quite sure what it's going to be. We're not returning to 2019. So people are having to start to make decisions about their own careers. What do they want going forward? Do people want to go back to the office? What have people gained or lost through working from home? How could they see that being different going forward in a situation where we're not locked down and we can return to something more like business as usual? So it's a very exciting inflection point.
You know, it's interesting because one of the things that I just find really curious about some of the situations I hear about from our student community is how many people work in organizations where they're being given the option. So it's not that the organization is saying, okay, everybody's going to work from home and we're going to reduce our commercial real estate overhead. You know, it seems that there are a number of organizations that are saying we're going to give our research department or other employees, I guess, as well, the option of whether or not they want to continue working from home part-time or full-time. And so what I hear from people is, well, I'm being given the opportunity to weigh in on how I want to do this. It's not being dictated to me. I'm being given this. And sometimes I hear from people who say, I would actually really like to continue working from home full-time. I have found that giving up that time I used to spend on commuting, I now have more time with my family, or I have time for self-care routines that I didn't used to have time for, and I don't want to give that up. But if I say to my manager, I'm going to choose to work from home, is this sending a signal to my manager that I'm not as career oriented? Or, you know, they're like, they're worried that there might be some unintended consequences of making that choice.
Yeah, and it's a very valid question, because we are in uncharted territory, and all the other cliches that writers in this space routinely. I try and give myself a quota of unprecedented and all that, you know, how many times a week to use each word, but it's true. We haven't been here before. We don't know how things are going to look like as they unfold. It's good to hear about people being given a choice, because that's certainly not the case in every situation. I think the idea of giving people a choice implies a certain amount of integrity on behalf of the decision makers, acknowledgement that they don't have all the answers and that we're still in a state of flux. Compared to some industries, I've heard people who've heard that they're going back to the office from the media, never mind from their organization, you know, some kind of soundbite from the CEO somewhere, we're all going back, or we're selling the office, or something in between. I think what this speaks to is a lot of organizations don't know yet. They want to try and do something different and give people back what they feel they've lost, but they also want to acknowledge the fact that people haven't had choices lately, and choice is very empowering. Losing choice and being legally locked down is incredibly disempowering, and it's really good, therefore, I think, if people are being offered that choice. But how you make that choice is something that people often don't feel very informed about how to go about, because we haven't been in this situation before. Now, I'm obviously a 20-year work from home, 21-year work from home veteran and advocate. I believe very powerfully in the idea that when you take work out of a fixed location, loads of exciting and amazing things can happen in your life. I also fully acknowledge that working from home isn't the best for everybody. There are personality types, there are activity types, there are things that, there are people and groups of people who simply thrive on that energy of being co-located and sparking off each other. You can generate a lot of that online, not all of it. What a lot of people are talking about now are hybrid workspaces, and that term's being thrown around quite blithely, often without much context. And hybrid working can mean lots of different things. What it means, first and foremost, is there isn't enough room in the buildings that we've got to accommodate people in a safe, socially distanced way. So we can't have everybody back sitting where they were. They'd be too close together. So what we're going to do is have some people some of the time. So what we need to understand is, does that mean we have all the people some of the time? Do we have some of the people all of the time and all the other people are at home? Do people have a choice about that? And at what level does that choice get made? Is it made at a team level, where somebody says, I need this group of people to be working together on paired programming or product development or creating a report together, and these people can work independently? Or is it that we might have a meeting once a week, I want everybody in? Or, you know, all of these things are going to be very complex resource management issues. And in amongst that, there's these poor individuals wondering about their own career and wondering about where they want to live. Do I move out of the cramped urban apartment I've spent lockdown in, because I love working from home, but I could only realistically do it if I had a spare room that I could dedicate to an office. And that would mean moving an hour out of London or New York or wherever rents are well overdue for a correction. So there are people trying to make those decisions, and also concerned about that availability bias that every quali knows about, that if you're in the office and that's where the managers are, is that where the opportunities are? And is that where things will come up unconsciously, unspokenly? Will the office become like the golf course of a couple of decades ago? Will we end up with indirect discrimination if more women, more carers, more people with disabilities opt for home-based working? And will that reinforce that discrimination if we have people in the office who are then receiving those opportunities because they happen to bump into the CEO in the break room or whatever? So these are very real issues that people need to be quite tactical about overcoming, I think. And I firmly believe that if you love the work from home lifestyle, the remote lifestyle, then it's well worth doing, and it's well worth acknowledging these things and tackling them head on, because the benefits it can bring you when you can actually choose where to live are just so amazing. For me, it meant moving my family to another country and bringing them up in a completely different culture and climate. It was something I was able to do 10 years ago, which a lot of people haven't been able to contemplate, because work is where work is a place that you go. Once you separate those things, you have so many more choices, but you do have to work to overcome the structural disadvantages it can introduce. So it's really important that people are talking about this wherever they are in their career.
Then thinking about the folks who are opting for work from home, who are saying, okay, I was given a choice. I would like to choose the work from home, but as you say, I don't want to miss out on the golf course effect of being in the office even occasionally. But at the same time, I know my manager hates getting 10-paragraph emails from me with status updates. Are there creative solutions or there tactics that help them to feel or to be able to try to replicate some of those happy accidents that happen in office, even if you are from home? I'm interested in any specific examples you may have, or if you've even perhaps heard from team managers who've said things to you like, you know, the work from home people who have been most successful for us are the people who have done these things to kind of maintain some interaction.
When you're the remote person on a hybrid team, you need to bring your whole communication to those fairly limited interfaces, which might be text or email or a video call like this. So you do need to over communicate to an extent, but the 10-page email probably isn't the best tactic. Far better would be 10 short instant messages through the day, for example, in your Slack or whatever it is you use. Try to make those things not just between you and your manager, but somewhere public and transparent. It's a good idea to use the old paradigm of say what you're going to do the thing, say you've done it, just to close the loop. Ideally, the thing you've done will be visible in some kind of project management tool anyway, but if it's not, then you need to talk about it. What else can you do? Make sure that your profiles are populated in any tool that you use, like Microsoft Teams or Slack. You want just that little picture. So make sure it's a professional looking image, that it's a consistent one. And above all, use the fact that the online space has some hierarchies removed from it. You know, you might not be able to walk down to the CEO's office and knock on the door. You have to go through their PA and everything else, whereas you could just direct message them. So there are some advantages to the online space that remove some of that structural hierarchy. So you might as well play your advantages where you can.
Excellent. I love all of those examples. And you know, the thing about the image is really interesting to me, because it's true. So many people do have multiple ways now of communicating, and you may have different images of yourself in the different platforms, but I see your point that it could really be a nice touch to just pick one good picture and have that be consistent across whatever platforms. You know, if you are using a project management tool where you have an image and Slack and Skype and whatever else that you may have, I think that's
externally, you know, in your LinkedIn and so on. It's an icky phrase from entrepreneurialism, the idea of personal branding, but it matters. And you can, you know, you bring that almost as an entrepreneur to your organization, but then you're also representing your organization externally. If you're at a conference or an event or something online, you can use that same image or that same set with the same kind of background and everything else. You know, we shouldn't have to think about these things, but in our very visual culture, we do. The other thing to remember, if you're using something like Teams or Slack, we tend to default to typing little messages, but generally they're very rich environments. Why not send a picture or a sketch, an audio clip? You know, if you're responding to something and you just want to talk about how you feel or something like that, bring yourself into the room as much as you can. It takes a little bit more effort, but it's well worth it.
I love that idea. I think it is true that we do tend to rely on just typing, and yet these are often media-rich environments. So that's a really interesting thing that you're mentioning there. So I guess just in closing, the one last question I would have is to flip it to the other side. So sometimes I've got clients who they're the team managers, and they might be sending their team, their students through us for onboarding, for upskilling. But from the team managers, what I hear about is, you know, for those that have experience with work from home, they're a little bit more comfortable. But for those who kind of got thrust into it this past 15 months without the benefit of doing a pilot or anything else that you would have normally done with in your consulting practice, there's sometimes this uncertainty about how how to make sure that the volume of work is happening consistently. Now, this is purely anecdotal, but for example, I once heard from a team manager who basically said, I get the feeling with some of my folks that now they're doing a lot of their work like on nights and weekends. And so which is, if the quality of work is really great, that's fine. But sometimes I'm feeling like I'd really rather make sure that they were working during the normal business hours. And I feel like I would be getting better quality work if they're, focused for a normal work day as opposed to squeezing it in on nights and weekends.
Well,
So
that's an interesting one. I would say maybe they're better at working at night. I don't think that's the time that's the problem there, it's the quality. So finding ways to manage that, to actually define the performance indicators that matter. And maybe finding better ways to make the work itself visible, some kind of digitizing a dashboard, a project management system. I mean, it depends what the work is, so it's impossible to prescribe, but finding a way of seeing who's doing what without having to look over there, he looks busy tapping away on the keyboard, because you won't have that. So finding some way of making the work and the progress and the different activities visible is a really good way of trying to tackle that problem, and reassuring the manager who's thinking, I don't know who's putting their weight here or not.
Right. No, and it is interesting because, that could be that bias of, does the manager just have a bias of, I prefer people to work during normal business hours? Well, if that's your, is that arbitrary, or is that really correlated to work quality? And that, that might also have to do with employment contracts. I don't know. But it's an interesting thing.
Yeah. A lot of our employment law in the US and in the UK and in Europe it's really arcane, and it comes from this industrial era when we all had to be on a production line. So you do that thing and then I do that thing, and it moves along. And if we're not in the same building at the same time, it's not going to happen. Most modern knowledge work isn't like that. And most people don't necessarily work at their best between 9 and 5 of a day. So I think you have to have a bit more trust with remote work. You have to have better ways of managing by results rather than activities. Otherwise you'll go mad, because you can't see the activities, unless you're going to put a spy cam or monitoring software. And people tried to do that. There was a massive spike in the search volumes for surveillance software and keystroke monitoring and all sorts of horrendous sounding things last spring, because managers had no idea what to do. So they couldn't see any of their people. And if a lot of their job was management by kind of wandering around, and they couldn't do that anymore, so they were trying to do it electronically. Whereas the really smart people thought about, okay, what's the work, what's the output, what's the value that these people are creating? How can we make that manifest in a way where we can see that whole process? Whereas I, as a manager, can support that process. I can see where a project may be stuck or bottlenecked, or somebody's struggling, or somebody's being unproductive and might need some one-to-one support or upskilling or whatever. So finding ways to make that visible digitally. And that doesn't mean dragging everyone into meetings to talk about it either. It means finding ways which shows up when they do it, rather than having to have endless status Zooms about it. And then people end up working at night because they spent all day in meetings. That's not what you want either.
No, that's a really great point. And I really like your point about needing to learn how to manage by results versus activity. And it's interesting to me because with some of the team leaders that I've spoken to over the past year, some have said to me, we're doing things now that we should have been doing for years, but we kept postponing in terms of, for example, having better task management or project management platforms. And so it's almost like we really should have been doing some of this stuff anyway, but this really forced us to do it.
Yeah.
And really, kind of amp up how we do project management.
I know. And it's a really, quite apart from the very real tragedies associated with the global health crisis and the economic chaos, apart from that, it's an incredibly exciting time from a work and process and communications management point of view. Things have accelerated maybe 10 years in 1 year in terms of moving to cloud technologies for collaboration and communication, moving to location independent working, in terms of individuals taking control of their lives and careers and designing the intersection of those that they really want. So this is an amazing time, actually. And if you're lucky enough to have work that can be done from anywhere, you have more opportunity than ever in your life to create the career and the life that you want from it. So, I think we have to see ourselves as hopefully coming out the other side of a really terrible time, and researchers will matter because these stories need to be told. People need to know what's going on. Research, data-driven stories about what's happening in the world and the new normal in this era of fake news has never been more important. So I really hope researchers will take advantage of everything that this opportunity offers to them.
Excellent. Maya, I could talk about this with you for so much longer, but I know our time is up. I want to thank you so much, and I will share your contact information in the notes below. But how would you like people to contact you?
I'm easy to contact on LinkedIn, on Twitter. If you can find Maya Middlemiss, it's me. So I'm the only one. So please add me on LinkedIn. And Healthy Happy Home Working is the project that we set up for this community to help people who are working from home with or without choice. So we've got a nice Facebook community there. So do come along and say hi and join the mailing list.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, Maya. I appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. Make sure you never miss a new one by clicking the subscribe button now.